Bum, 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 bum. Oh no, Lobster Man has struck again. Okay, Jordan Peterson. Why am I am no longer a tenured professor at the University of Toronto. The appalling ideology of diversity, inclusion, and equity is demolishing education and business. Oh no. Okay, let's see what Jody has to say. I recently resigned from my position as full tenured professor at the University of Toronto. I am now Professor Emeritus, and before I turn 60, Emeritus is generally a designation reserved for superannuated faculty, albeit those who had served their term with some distinction. I envision teaching and researching at the U of T full time until they had to haul my skeleton out of the office. So you were booted out. So sorry to hear that. I love my job, and my students, undergraduates and graduates alike, were positively predisposed toward me. Really? Would that be every single student, or merely a select proportion of them? Why don't we poll every one of Geordie's students and we see which, if everyone was positively predisposed toward him? Would his transgender students be positively predisposed toward him as well? But that career path was not meant to be. There were many reasons, including the fact that I can now teach many more people with less interference online. But here's a few more. First, my qualified and supremely trained heterosexual white male graduate students face a negligible chance of being offered university research positions despite stellar scientific dossiers. Really, a negligible chance of being offered university research positions. As far as I can recall, though, the vast majority of postgraduate students in Western universities are still Caucasian, Caucasian males. So it's not something that you really see in reality, It's really, and why, for a guy who loathes identity politics, he's really, really quick to jump on the identity politic bandwagon, dirty brown, black, yellow immigrants stealing our jobs. This is partly because of diversity, inclusivity, and equity mandates. These have been imposed universally in academia, despite the fact that university hiring committees had already done everything reasonable for all the years of my career to ensure that no qualified minority candidates were overlooked. My students were also partly unacceptable precisely because they are my students. I am academic persona non grata because of my unacceptable philosophical positions. Well, I don't know. Johnny has had some very, very queer philosophical positions. He is very I wouldn't say that, Geordie is a white nationalist or a white supremacist, at least, but certainly he's had some very, very queer philosophical positions, like the idea that lipstick and provocative clothing can somehow entice men to sexually harass, or the idea that, enforced monogamy might really be a good thing, because apparently, the answer to insulting, or the answer to angry, violent men like Elliot Roger is to pair up these angry, violent, entitled men with women. Yeah, so that they have a sex slave and they're not going to be lashing out at society. Yeah, Geordie's, you can't really blame people for assuming that Geordie is for calling Geordie the incel whisperer, And also, yeah, I wouldn't want my daughter to be lectured by a professor like that, I'd be very, very concerned. if a university were to have a lecturer like that, with thoughts like that, lecturing my daughter. Yeah. And this isn't just some inconvenience. These facts rendered my job morally untenable. How can I accept prospective researchers and train them in good conscience, knowing their employment prospects to be minimal? Well, I see what you're doing here, Jordy. You're playing the Messiah, aren't you? You know, for a guy who hates virtue signaling as well, you're sure quick to virtue signal, you know, like to act as if you're doing a favor to your future prospective students who would be treated like pariahs by the academic world by resigning from university to pursue more lucrative grifting opportunities. You know, it's kind of like the pastor in the movie Devil all the time, who goes like, oh no, poor people gotta bring what they can to the table, and I'm gonna sacrifice myself like the good Lord Jesus Christ did by eating them organs. Well, you guys can have the white meat and the red meat. But even though the pastor actually wanted all those organs for himself, you know, so it's like he's basically trying to frame it in such a way that resigning from his position to pursue more lucrative alt-right grifting opportunities is somehow noble and altruistic. Second reason, this is one of many issues of appalling ideology currently demolishing the universities and downstream the general culture, not least because there are simply not enough qualified BIPOC people in the pipeline to meet diversity tangents quickly enough. BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. For those of you not in the knowing world, okay. Now, if you had taken out the word qualified and simply said there's not enough BIPOC people in the pipeline to meet diversity targets quickly enough, that would have meant something very different. But this is basically, what is this? A dog whistle. You know, this is a dog whistle to say that, you know, blacks and browns and indigenous people are, you know, not qualified enough. At least most of them aren't qualified enough to be taking on, you know, stellar academic positions, like taking on academic positions. Okay. This has been common knowledge among any remotely truthful academic who has served on a high-rank committee for the last 3 decades. This means we're out to produce a generation of researchers utterly unqualified for their job. Another dog whistle, you know, juxtapose this with my qualified and supremely trained heterosexual white male graduate students. And you can see why, you know, even though Peterson might not be a white nationalist personally, he might not, I'm just saying he might not be a Nazi personally. You can understand why the likes of Stefan Molyneux love this guy. Yeah, and you know, it's not really good optics considering that he's on very friendly terms with Molyneux, you know, who is an actual white supremacist. Okay, all right. Yeah. And we've seen what that means already in the horrible grievance studies disciplines that combine, I think he's talking about, you know, critical race theory and things like that, combined with the death of objective testing, has compromised the university so badly, it can hardly be overstated. And what happens in universities eventually colors everything, as we have discovered. Yeah, when universities sneeze, the whole world catches the flu. You know, that's why there's so many people influenced by the thinking of Jordan Peterson, you know, going down this dark alt-right rabbit hole. Some of my colleagues even allow themselves to undergo so-called anti-bias training conducted by supremely qualified human resources personnel, lecturing innately and blithely in an accusatory manner about theoretically all-pervasive racist, sexist, heterosexist attitudes. Such training is now often a precondition to occupy a faculty position on a hiring committee. Well, I mean, a university, university, the prefix of university, uni, means global, right? A university has got to be, a universal environment, That's the whole point of a university. So it's important that people can understand the differences of various cultures and do as much as humanly possible to respect and appreciate these differences. And cultural sensitivity is important from a capitalist perspective as well, because when you have students coming in from vastly different cultures, like Asian culture, for example, I expect my culture to be respected by the lecturers, the professors. Even if they don't necessarily agree with it, they have to at least agree to disagree respectfully. Otherwise, I can always, as an international student, I'm bringing you, I'm paying for your, my parents are paying school fees, right? So the least you can do is respect, at least show some basic respect and at least some acknowledgement of my culture. Don't act as if I don't have a culture of my own. And of course, cultural sensitivity training is very, very important. You cannot underestimate just how important it is. Even when you're teaching at an international school, you have to be aware of certain sensitivities that you must observe with different cultures. Yeah, it's just how you keep cohesion running. You don't say that, oh, I don't have to respect cultural differences. I can tell my students that my culture is the best culture. Doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. Well, you can read the article yourself. It's pretty long. I don't have all day, but I'll just take out the best bits so you can read it yourself. I'll put a link to it in the description box. Okay. Okay. It's a bit long. Right. Furthermore, the accrediting boards for graduate clinical psychology training programs in Canada are now planning to refuse to accredit university clinical programs unless they have a social justice orientation. Okay, that we got to fact check this one. That true? Okay, what exactly does he mean by a social justice orientation, though? I mean, these Anglo right-wingers, they're a particularly unique bunch of people. They treat social justice like it's some kind of a bad thing, like social justice warriors basically use as ad hominem towards anyone they don't like. So it's kind of like, they're so self-centered and they're so bloody selfish that they actually think social justice is a bad thing. That combined with some recent legislative changes in Canada claiming to outlaw so-called conversion therapy. Okay, but really making it exceedingly risky for clinicians to do anything ever but agree always and about everything with their clients. Well, conversion therapy is basically when you assume that you can convert a gay man into a straight man, right? All right, Johnny, suppose I put you in a room full of half-naked men who look like, I don't know, my idea of good looking is a K-pop star. So I put you in a room full of half-naked Korean boy band members. Are you gonna turn gay? Is it possible to convert you? Would you like that, Jordy? Would you like that to be legal? Like, would you like to have a taste of your own medicine? Have likely doomed the practice of clinical psychology, which always depended entirely on trust and privacy. Similar moves are afoot in other professional disciplines such as medicine and law. And if you don't think that psychologists, lawyers, and other professionals are anything but terrified of their now woke governing, wokes and other buzzword that the right keeps using again and again and again and again and again, like the boy who cried wolf, you know, it's eventually it loses its meaning and it kind of it just becomes a buzzword against anyone they don't like. Governing professional colleges, much to everyone's extreme detriment. You simply don't understand how far this has all gone. Okay, just exactly what am I supposed to do when I meet a graduate student or young professor hired on DIE grounds? Manifest instant skepticism regarding their professional ability? What a slap in the face to a truly meritorious young outsider. And perhaps that's the point. The DIE ideology is not a friend of peace and tolerance. It's absolutely and completely the enemy of competence and justice. Well, the reason it exists, Jordan, is because, you know, historically, you know, universities in the Western world have historically had a white, you know, Caucasian hiring bias. In fact, institutions in the Western world have historically favored hiring Caucasians. Now, you even hear cases of, like, you know, Asians with Asian names applying for jobs with stellar academic results, but who don't get callbacks because of their Asian names. You know, my brother, you know, he did much better than his course mates in dentistry, and yet at the same time they were able to find jobs far more easily. You know, in fact, he ended up working for an Indian boss. You know, so I suppose tribalism cuts both ways. You know, whites hire whites, Asians hire Asians. But I guess what these universities are doing is ensuring, perhaps you could call it misplaced, but they're trying to ensure that, you know, by having a quota on minority students, that minorities don't get sidelined. Whether you agree with it's a good thing or not, is to ensure that, you know, certain employers, if they could have their way, they would have an entirely all-white board, right? That's so it's basically a check and balance to prevent employers who have a white bias from employing only whites, you know? All right, well, so yeah. Or even employers who have an employment bias for Asians to prevent hiring only Asians, you know? They also have to, you know, they have to employ like indigenous, black and brown people as well. Okay. And for those of you who think that I'm overstating the case, or that this is something limited to some trivial sense of the universities, consider some other examples. This report from Hollywood, cliched hotbed of liberal sentiment, for example, indicates how far this has gone. Again, we'll skip down here. We are now at the point where race, ethnicity, gender, or sexual preference is first accepted as the fundamental characteristic defining each person, just as the radical leftists were hoping, and second is now treated as the most important qualification for study, research, and employment. Weren't you just insinuating that blacks and browns are not generally as qualified as whites? Weren't you just insinuating that? Need I point out that this is insane? Even the benighted New York Times has its doubts. Okay. Okay. Can't you see that by going along sheep-like, just as the professors are doing, just as the artists and writers are doing, that you are generating a veritable fifth column within your businesses? Are you really so blind, cowed, and cowardly with your so-called privilege? Okay, well, you know, businesses are businesses. Artists, like musicians, are businesses. It makes sense to cater to their target audience, right? So, you know, you could like your ideas might or might not be true, but they're certainly not popular, right? And so musicians want to make a buck, you know, will cater to the most popular ideas, right? It's just the way the cookie crumbles. It's pretty long. Yeah. All right. Finally, do you know that Vladimir Putin himself is capitalizing on this woke madness? The advocates of so-called social progress believe they are introducing humanity to some kind of new and better consciousness. Godspeed. Hoist the flags, as we say. Go right ahead. The only thing that I want to say now is that their prescriptions are not new at all. Okay, right. The Bolsheviks relying on the dogmas of Marx and Engels. Yeah, Peterson hates Marx. Despises him. Okay. The destruction of age-old values, religion, and relations between people, up to and including the total rejection of family. We had that too. Encouragement to inform their loved ones. All this was proclaimed progress. And by the way, it was widely supported around the world back then and was quite fashionable, same as today. By the way, Bolsheviks were absolutely intolerant of opinions other than theirs. Isn't that rich? Peterson is supposed to be this free speech warrior. Supposed to be the one fighting for total and utter freedom of speech. Supposedly Peterson, according to Peterson, the leftists are authoritarians. They are, you know, they're trying to control the narrative. These woke mob, these people who, you know, are just they have so much political power that they can actually control the narrative and force people to use gender pronouns they don't like. But really, most wokeists are just, you know, poor proletariats struggling to make a buck. And for somebody who's supposed to be this free speech warrior, let's take a look at what Peterson did 3 years ago. Right? You're thinking, wait, right. Let's take a look. Professor Jordan Peterson threatens to sue after critic called him a misogynist. Yeah. Yeah, Peterson wasn't too happy about being called a misogynist. That he actually demanded that those allegations about him being misogynistic would be retracted. He demanded that, otherwise he would take legal action. Yeah, love it when he now he might or might not be a misogynist. I suspect he might be, but he might not be at the same time. But you know, to threaten to sue someone for calling you a misogynist, you know, that's not just libel. I mean, that's not a case of libel. That is you know, libel. I mean, for example, that would be saying that you're a child molester, right? That's that means they're accusing you of something that you did or did not do, right? But calling someone a misogynist is just like calling someone a racist. Like I get plenty of really negative comments, you know, calling me, some even call me the Asian version of Hitler, right? Xeno supremacist, what have you. You know, I can't sue them. That's what they genuinely think about me, and they're entitled to their opinion. So maybe I, an Oriental barbarian, understands more about free speech than Johnny does. You know, you're free to have an opinion about someone, of course, and you know, instead of suing them, you should at least be able to counter. You need to, the burden on proof lies on you to prove that you are not what the other person alleges you are, right? It's different from if somebody alleges that you did something, like you raped someone or you molested a child. Then of course the burden of proof lies on them. But if someone alleges that you're racist or misogynist or sexist or a homophobe or a transphobe, chances are they have good reason, or at least they have reasons for assuming that, right? So the burden of proof really lies on you. And honestly, I don't think I can, I will defend men who get accused of misogyny, like Tony Abbott, for example. I defended him when he was accused of misogyny. I think Abbott's a reasonable conservative. But when it comes to Peterson, looking at some of the stuff he said on like enforced monogamy or lipstick and provocative clothing, enticing men to harass, and how more regulation should be placed on women rather than men, I would say that Peterson and Zakir Naik are surprisingly similar in many ways. Just that, of course, I don't think he'd be very happy to hear that, because it doesn't really, it's not really flattering for people in the alt-right compared to brown people. Okay, all right. For shame, CEOs signaling a virtue you don't possess and shouldn't want to please a minority who literally live their lives by displeasure. You're evil capitalists after all and should be proud of it. Oh, fuck. I hope he's being tongue-in-cheek there. I can't really tell if Peterson is being tongue-in-cheek or not. So sorry. Musicians, artists, writers, stop bending your sacred and meritorious art to the demands of the propagandists who, before you fatally betray the spirit of your own institution, stop censoring your thought. And you were very quick to censor this critic of yours. You were very quick to attempt to censor this critic of yours for calling you a misogynist. That's her thought. That's what she believes about you. Stop saying you will hire for your orchestral and theatrical productions for any other reason other than talent and excellence. That's all you have. That's all any of us have. Yeah, I agree with that though. This is one point at which I agree. He who sows the wind will reap the whirlwind, and the wind is rising. Okay, all right. So yeah, basically, Peterson acts as if, he's always like the guy, who acts, the co-worker who keeps, ruining the company image and constantly does things that are detrimental to the company. And instead of blaming himself, he blames the company for being a shitty company. That's pretty much how my perception of Peterson, right? I mean, there was one part where in this article as well, it's just one more part I want to go to demonstrate his hypocrisy. Okay, the fight for equality and against discrimination has turned into aggressive dogmatism, bordering on absurdity, when the works of the great authors of the past, such as Shakespeare, are no longer taught at schools and universities because their ideas are believed to be backward. Okay, that's an obvious straw man. As far as I can recall, Western history and Western literature is still going strong in school, right? When I went to the University of Adelaide to study, I did portraiture and power. The course was designed by people like Peterson. And my lecturer actually apologized to me. She said, I'm very sorry, we don't have any portraits of Chinese emperors or Mughal kings. And I told her, no, it's all right. I understand. You're just, you have to teach this syllabus. We were only learning about European monarchs, right? Yes, I did Shakespeare as an elective as well. I studied one semester of Shakespeare. And as far as I can recall, Western classical authors are mandatory, not only in the West, but in Asia as well, for school students to learn. So what is all this rubbish about Western classics being censored, being cut out of the curriculum? It's just not happening, In fact, we're not learning enough Asian or African literature. That's the way I see it. We're not getting enough. It's good actually to the contrary is actually taking place. Like it's quite the contrary actually. I mean, we're not learning enough about Asian, Middle Eastern, or African literature, right? And Peterson, in fact, wants to scrap. He actually wanted to scrap ethnic studies. And he wanted to, I don't know, he in his own words, by his own admission, scrap ethnic studies and train the students of the West in the Judeo-Christian classical tradition. Now, if I were to send my children to the West and pay good money for school fees, I don't want them to learn the Judeo-Christian classical tradition. I send them to Sunday school for that, right? So, yeah, Peterson's not really unhappy because his ideas, no, it's not because he's treated like a pariah. People like Peterson on the far right doth protest too much. They're unhappy, these reactionaries, because the world is not really headed in the direction they would like, right? If they would like, of course, universities would no longer teach about foreign cultures. They would no longer teach about ethnic history. They would focus solely on an Anglo-centric Judeo-Christian point of view. He would love that. He would have no complaints about that, right? He would not be accusing the universities of, having an agenda if that were the case. But because universities are becoming more progressive, they're becoming more aware, and we're learning that there were black tutors as well, and that our knowledge of the medieval and the early modern period is not quite, there's not quite as accurate as we like to think it was, right? There are certain things in our there were certain aspects of our knowledge base that need to be rectified, right? In light of historical evidence. Ooh, Peterson's not happy about that, pretty much. They're not actually, people like Peterson would be great as pastors, or perhaps he'd make a good politician as well, Like Trump actually did a good job as a demagogue, rallying, basically appealing to the delicate sensitivities of the white male masses. And Peterson seems to be doing a good job of that as well, making white males believe that they're some kind of an endangered species. Hardly the case, though. Hardly the case. So yeah, Peterson should probably go into politics. But as a university professor, I don't think he's really qualified to be a professor as well. All right, well, academically he is qualified, but I don't think he's the right fit for a university professor, because as a university professor, you have to be open-minded, and you have to be, well, you can have conservative views. Like I have certain conservative views. I believe strongly in the multi-generational Asian family unit, but you have to be open-minded in some ways, and you have to be willing to progress in many ways. Something which is, the antithesis of conservatism. So that's why Kavernacle made a video, I'll put another link to Kavernacle's video in the description box. Why right-wingers in the West make such poor academics? Because basically they see things through a very colonialist, very old school kind of view. It's not really relevant in the post-Victorian era. It's not really relevant. All right, thank you everyone, and have a nice day.